you again. I'm your host.
How much time do we have?
2 hours.
2?
Yes.
Okay.
I will make a short introduction.
Yes.
And after that, we will have the speech. After that is the questions.
Normally what I do is I talk for 12, 15 minutes, and then I give questions because I don't want the audience to follow me.
Great. Okay. Your Excellency, with your permission, we'll start. And with your permission, I will say a few words about you and about this state visit. And after that, we'll have a second part where Excellency, the Ministry of State for Foreign Affairs, Mr. Ahmed Al-Jubeir. I think excellent, thank you. Marhaba. We'll have its conference, and the third section will be the most consistent and substantial, I think, in terms of time, would be the questions and the answer. But before that, it's a great pleasure and honor to have you here for the first time, almost 3 days in Romania, which is amazing. I hope that you like, well, our city and our blessed country. And Mr. Minister had already meetings with Mr. President, with Mr. Prime Minister, the Parliament, with Mr. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs. And last but not least, it's here with a lot of interested people. As you can see, no empty rooms. It could have been even better in terms of students, but they are in vacation. But what we have here, we have ministers, representatives of the academic life, of high personalities from our society, from the Minister of Foreign Affairs, for the Minister of Education, and for many other entities interested in our collaboration between Romania and Saudi Arabia. So, more or less, I think everybody knows you, how active you are. And as I said, we are proud that you visited Romania in this framework of the 25th years of collaboration between our states. And I know that you visited before, in the previous years, Poland and Hungary and many other states in this Balkanic and South European context. So I wouldn't say more, except that we are very pleased to see that in the last year, in terms of both foreign affairs and internal affairs, from our perspective, your country changed a lot. As you mentioned in the meetings with our Prime Minister, there is a lot of things to say. and a lot of development in your country. Maybe you will mention that in your discourse, so I'm not going to mention anything now. But I would like to mention some differences from the very beginning. For instance, we are facing a very substantial demographic problem, where yes, I don't know if you, I'm pretty sure that most of you know that better than me, that more than 50% of the citizens are less than 25 years old. So the country is very young and looking forward. And to look forward means, on a long term, means to invest a lot in education and science and creativity. And I'm pretty sure that you already do that, and you will do it even further, maybe in collaboration with us. I'm representing the academic life in Romania, and I'm representing the University of Bucharest, which is very proud to host you here. Unfortunately, our rector is not in the city, but he sends your best regards. And with thanks to the Central Library for hosting us. So now I will give you the floor. You said for 15, 20 minutes, as much as you wish, and after that we'll take the questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm not very good at technology. Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's great. It's a great honor to be here with you today. If you allow me, I would like to say a few words about our bilateral relationship, and then a few words about how we see the region, and then I'd be happy to take questions from you. I think we will be celebrating the 25th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Romania on the 13th of March. I believe that our two countries have excellent relations in terms of political relations. We're trying to broaden and deepen this relationship further. We both believe in the principle of the sovereignty of nations. We believe in the principle of the rules-based international order. We believe in the principle of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. And I think as a consequence of this, we look at the challenges in our region and in the world in very similar ways. And we look forward to building this relationship even more in all areas. So that's on the bilateral level. In terms of the regional level, we have a war in Yemen. We have Al-Shabaab terrorist organization in Somalia. We have trying to work to stabilize Sudan and move it towards a safe harbor. We're trying to find a way to end the conflict in Libya. We are working with our European allies in terms of defeating Boko Haram in the G5 Sahel countries. We have tensions between Israelis and Palestinians. We have tensions in Lebanon. We have a war in Syria. We have conflict and tensions in Iraq. We have Iran on a rampage. We have tensions in Afghanistan. We have tensions between Pakistan and India. We have terrorists, we have pirates, and we have traffickers. And other than that, it's a great neighborhood. And what we have done in Saudi Arabia is we are focusing internally. We are implementing our Vision 2030, which is driven by His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. The objective is to diversify our sources of income, reduce our reliance on oil, empower, open up new areas for investments, recreation, entertainment, tourism, other areas, empower our youth, empower women, instill a culture of openness and tolerance and moderation that is based on technology, that's based on rule of law, in order to be able to attract investments, both internal and external. And we believe that when we do this, that our wealth will increase and we will become more immune to the problems around us. So that's what we're focused on internally. What has happened in the last 2 or 3 years in Saudi Arabia is revolutionary. Women are empowered. We have the issue of women's driving resolved. Women can get passports and travel without anyone's permission. Our law stipulates that a woman gets the same salary as a man for the same job. all public sector jobs are open to women. 39% of our entrepreneurs today are women, according to the Ministry of Economy and Investment, Trade and Investment in Saudi Arabia. And this is just the beginning. In the Foreign Ministry, 5 years ago, the incoming class of diplomats were 10% women. By last year, it was 50%. So a lot of change. And a lot of change in terms of the public space. We have entertainment, we have recreation, we have concerts, and we have tourist visas that all of you can apply online and come visit us and see for yourself. We are developing our ancient sites. We discovered sites that we have in Al-Ula, for example. We discovered several civilizations. We discovered 6 languages. The alphabet emerged from there and then went to India, then went to the rest of the world. We discovered other civilizations that are mirror images of civilizations around us: Phoenician, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, Yemenite, Babylonian, and we're in the process of excavating and preserving and showcasing it to the world. And this is going to be a huge issue for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and I also believe for the world. So that's our internal situation. Saudi Arabia is a status quo power. We have no interest in expanding. We don't need land, we don't need people, we don't need resources. We need to focus on our people and our country. That's what drives our policy. So our policy is about trying to bring peace to the region and stability so that we can focus even more on taking care of our people. We have worked to try to stabilize the Red Sea. We worked on establishing what we call the Red Sea Council, which includes all the countries along the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, in order to work together to integrate the economies, to make sure that we have balanced investments, to make sure that we can preserve the environmental issues in the Red Sea, that we can make sure that everybody benefits from the trade that goes through the Red Sea, and in the process, we stabilize the region. We have worked to try to bring an end to the conflict in Syria, but we're still working on it. We believe a political solution is the only way to do it. We are working in Yemen with Martin Griffith, the UN envoy, to try to move Yemen towards a political settlement based on UN Security Council Resolution 2216. And we're engaged in confidence building measures with the Houthis, the coalition is, which includes opening up the port of Hodeidah, allowing medical flights out of Sana'a airport, exchange of prisoners, and it is our hope that we will be able to then move towards a comprehensive political settlement in Yemen. We are committed to supporting Yemen. We have provided $14 billion in humanitarian assistance since the war began. We have established an office for the reconstruction of Yemen in Saudi Arabia that looks at the country as a whole in order to see what we can do once the war ends in order to quickly rebuild Yemen, and we're committed to this. Yemen is our neighbor, Yemen is our family. We have tribal links, we have family links, and so when Yemen suffers, we suffer, and when Yemen prospers, we prosper. That's how we look at Yemen. We don't see it as in any way as an enemy or a hostile country. We see them as our friends, and we see them as our family. That's what we're working on. The biggest challenge we face in the Middle East is Iran. In 1979, the Khomeini revolution transformed Iran from a nation state into a revolution. In the constitution of Iran today is enshrined the principle of exporting the revolution. Iran doesn't believe in borders. Iran doesn't believe in sovereignty of nations. Iran believes that every Shia should belong to Iran. That's like saying Italy claims every Catholic. That's not acceptable. Iran is a country that has supported terrorism, that provides missiles to terrorist organizations, whether it's Hezbollah, the Houthis, other groups, and Iran has engaged in the assassination of diplomats, attacks against embassies, attacks against places of worship. Iran is responsible for bombing a bus in Central Europe, a discotheque in Berlin, a synagogue in Argentina, housing complex in Saudi Arabia and Al-Jubeir, and it's never ending. They are exporting weapons, they are trying to recruit people in order to expand their revolution, and there has to be, that's why the Iranians are sanctioned by the international community for their support of terrorism and for their mischievous activities. We supported the Trump administration's decision to withdraw from the JCPOA because we believe that the nuclear deal was lacking. The 12-year limit on enrichment doesn't make sense. It has to be indefinite. We believe the inspections have to be broadened, and we believe that there are two other elements that need to be addressed in order to ensure that Iran is not a threat to the region and the world, and those two elements are dealing with Iran's ballistic missile program, which violates UN Security Council resolutions, and dealing with Iran's support for terrorism and interference in the affairs of other countries. Unless we deal with those three items, we will not be able to contain the Iranians in the way in which they should be contained. So we always say the Iranians have to decide if they want to be a respectable member of the international community or if they want to be an outcast. Right now they're an outcast. If you don't respect the rules-based international order that was established in the 1600s with the Treaty of Westphalia, then you should expect the world to react negatively towards you. And this is what's happening. And if the Iranians change their behavior, I think they can become a great nation again, and they can become a member of the international community. So anyway, I don't want to keep talking because I'd rather see what areas you would like me to address. But in short, I think we have a lot of challenges in the region. We are committed to dealing with those challenges. In Saudi Arabia, our number one priority is our people. In Saudi Arabia, one of our other priorities is to connect and reach out with the world. We believe we know that we are part of the global system. We are the largest exporter of oil in the world, so the international economic order is important to us. We are one of the largest investors in the world, so the international financial system is important to us. We sit between three continents geographically, so very important. Three of the most important waterways in the world are right next to us: the Strait of Hormuz, Bab el-Mandab, the Suez Canal, so that's important to us. We believe that the international order, that we believe that we live in a global village. Fires in the Amazon can affect climate in Riyadh. A coronavirus in China can affect the health of people in Budapest. The idea that we can be isolated, we don't subscribe to, and we believe that the global issues have to be dealt with through cooperation globally. Saudi Arabia is now the head of the G20 countries, and our focus is on how do we come up with innovative ways to deal with the challenges of the future? How do we protect our planet? How do we deal with environmental issues and global warming? How do we use technology to improve it? How do we empower youth and women? Is it through education? Is it through training? Is it by providing them with opportunity? How do we do that? And how do we deal with new technologies? Can we anticipate future problems and begin to deal with them today so that we can bend the arc of history? If we look at 2100, what are the problems that we are likely to encounter? And then let's work backwards and try to deal with them now in a proactive way rather than in a reactive way, so that we are ahead of the curve. That's our attitude when we look at the world, and that's our attitude when we're dealing with the presidency of the G20. So you will find that Saudi Arabia is a pragmatic state. Saudi Arabia is a country that believes in proportion and balance. We are not an ideologically driven country. We believe that things have to be practical and make sense in order for them to work, because every time you're driven by ideology, you veer off in a different direction. And that's who we are. We are Saudi Arabia. We are, our origins are Bedouins, merchants, or farmers. And all three are practical, pragmatic people. And as Bedouins, we have to tell the difference between a mirage and the real thing if we want to survive in the desert. So we have learned, it's in our DNA, to be practical and pragmatic and problem solving and to be non-ideological. That's how we approach the challenges around us, and that's how we look at the challenges in the world, and that's how we look at improving the situation of our people domestically. So I will stop here and take some questions, and once again, it's a great honor to be at this great institution, and thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. And I think that all of us appreciated your global perspective. From my perspective, you are very Leibnizian, seeing things interconnected. I mean, the fire in Amazon is influencing the stock markets in Japan and all these connections in the world. So let's connect better with this wonderful gathering, and we are going to take questions now. So who would like to break the ice? First, we'll start. Yes?
Good morning, Your Excellency Wazir Al-Jubeir. Ladies and gentlemen, I am the General Bartolomeu Constantin Savoiu, the President of Romanian Right Party, Alliance Law and Order. We are nationalist and right party, not very well known because our party, Alianța Lege și Ordine, has not the money of the great parties in Romania. But we have something they haven't. We have the doctrine, political and economic. Right nationalist party. I lived in Western countries 40 years about, on which 32 I was militating with the Jacques Chirac party. I visited your marvelous country, that I love a lot. I want to confess you something. I'm admiring and great supporter of the great man was His Excellency Royal Mohammed bin Sultan. I'm absolutely sure he will change your country. You are very important piece of political and world world in the Middle East. But I want to put one comment and one question. Because you are so important. You are fighting against the terrorism. You are some absolutely key role in all this region. I'm looking, I'm a little worried. They still, not directly, but the government, you are also supporting a lot of Salafist groups, association in West Europe. I was told you, 32 years working with the Jacques Chirac party, Gaullist party. I know very well the situation, all Middle East, also and you are a lot of association, Salafists, they are supporting by Saudian money. So how we can fight against the terrorism and support these people? I absolutely believe on His Highness, Royal Highness Mohammed bin Sultan. I'm sure he will fight against them. But we must stop this, I don't know which roads to give their money. This was my question. Second, the comment, I applauding the fact that finally you make alliance, maybe not a little hidden, but with Israel. Nothing can be done in this region without alliance also with Israel. We need all together. Could you imagine how you can change all this area with your money, with your wisdom, and also Israel's wisdom? We can make a tremendous thing, tremendous thing. So this, just to finish, to tell you, I hope you all the best. You must follow this road. I'm a great Sadiq of Arabic country. My wife is Arabic. Okay, I'm 8 years of marriage. I have 3 children. I'm feeling also a little Arabic. We must together. We are the same ship. If we are not together, we cannot fight. So all the best. Be strong. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are very fortunate in Saudi Arabia to have His Royal Highness the Crown Prince in our leadership. He is young, he's visionary, he's courageous, he makes decisions, and he, as they say in America, gets it. He knows what needs to be done and he's doing it. And his popularity is through the roof. The changes that he has pushed, the vision that he had put forward in terms of Vision 2030, the whole country is mobilized behind him. And we will end up in a much, much better place than we were, even though we were in a good place. But it really is transformative. And like I said, we are very fortunate to have him as one of our leaders. he is much closer to the young people in Saudi Arabia. 70% of our population is under the age of 30, and His Royal Highness is in his mid-30s, so he connects with people and he gets it. Having said that, with regard to extremism, we have a zero-tolerance policy. We will not allow anyone to preach hate or extremism or violence. We have had a problem in the 80s and in the 90s with charities who went out in terms of Afghanistan and in terms of Bosnia and so forth. We realized in the 90s that this mindset was poisoning our own country, and we began to curtail their activities. It is illegal for any Saudi to give money to extremist groups. We are one of the first countries that criminalized financing of terrorism or extremism. We have a number of people in jail in Saudi Arabia who do this. The problem that we face is what I call a legacy issue. There is a perception and there is a reality. Because of what happened in the 80s and early 90s, this perception was Saudis are funding not the government but charities. Our charities cannot send money outside Saudi Arabia. It's not legal. They cannot collect cash in public places or mosques. That's not legal. Everything has to be collected through bank accounts and spent inside Saudi Arabia. But because of the legacy issue, the perception still lingers. I remember a few years ago in France, there was a huge debate about Saudi funding for radical schools or Islamic institutions in France. The French Senate conducted a thorough investigation and found that less than 1% of the funding comes from the Gulf, not Saudi Arabia, less than 1% from the Gulf. That most of the funding came from Turkey and North Africa, because most of France's Muslims are from Turkey and North Africa. So you have a perception and you have a reality. And normally people say perception is reality. But in this case, because of the legacy from the 80s and early 90s, it still lingers in people's minds. The Saudis are funding extremism, the Saudis are funding Salafism. We have revived our education curriculums. We have retrained imams in mosques. We have dismissed thousands of imams from mosques. We have a zero-tolerance policy for extremism because the extremists are not interested in Bucharest or London or Paris. What they want is Mecca. So we are their target. And for us to be funding an ideology whose objective is to that would not make us rational people. It would make us something else. So we will continue along this path. We will continue to fight extremism. We will continue to push back against the ideology. And we know that this is a long process. That's why the openness that has happened in our society, the empowerment of youth, the empowerment of women, the desegregation of the public spaces, opening up the country to tourism and entertainment, that and recreation, that all is part of the effort to push back against this ideology. And the changes that are happening in Saudi Arabia are not only going to benefit Saudi Arabia, it's going to have a huge impact on the Islamic world. Because when people look at Saudi Arabia and they see a dynamic, innovative, inclusive, moderate, tolerant society that's based on ingenuity and technology, where women and youth are empowered, that's what they want to emulate. And so our reform agenda will have a huge impact on the world. But I want to emphasize again the idea, our policy on extremism is zero tolerance. We will not allow it to happen in our country, and we will not allow our citizens to go and promote extremist ideology. Now, you have a problem in Europe, and it pains me to say this, where when people preach extremism, my argument is jail them. And if they're not citizens of your great country, deport them. Now, you don't have this problem here in Romania. But when somebody preaches hate in London and wants to and supports suicide bombings, this person belongs in jail. not on Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, protected by the quote-unquote freedom of speech. So there has to be a line drawn between freedom of speech and between hate speech and incitement. And I think our friends in Europe have not been able to draw that line. Our approach is you preach hate, you get punished. Zero tolerance, because we cannot have people doing this. We've seen the effects of it, and we want to make sure that we put an end to it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll take another question from here. Please help the gentleman. I can offer you.
No problem. Professor, in between professors. Your Excellency, thank you very much. I'm just not going to comment, neither put you in position of making nuances, but more maybe take profit of your presence here. My name is Julian Kifo. I'm the president of the Conflict Prevention and Early Warning Center, and I would be quite interested to see your take on the new project on the Middle East of President Trump. Maybe if you don't have a consolidated position, at least some ideas or some lines that you already draw in that direction. And the second point, yes, you are in international relations. I'm coming back to this, but I think that you already noticed our Green Deal. You already notified and understood the idea of global heating. You already mentioned it. How are you going to make the shift? Because it's a matter of more or less 10 years or so window of opportunity to move from oil and gas to, I don't know, you have a lot of sand, you have a lot of wind, maybe in such directions, and how the whole process of changing your economy can happen. I won't bother you with the third question. Would be to see a little bit on your relation with Qatar, Turkey, and Israel, if you can mention them. We really want to have your insight into this. Thank you.
Thank you. With regards to the Trump plan, our position has been that there are positive elements in it, and that it could be a basis for negotiation, and we support all efforts to arrive at a negotiated settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. Saudi Arabia put forth the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002, which was adopted by all the Arab countries, as well as all the Islamic countries, by the Arab countries at the Beirut Summit in 2002, by the Islamic countries at the Mecca Summit in December of 2005. So we support all efforts to arrive at a negotiated settlement. But we cannot negotiate for the Palestinians. It's their issue. They need to be able to sit down and decide what they want to do. So our position is supportive of the Palestinians, and that's where we are now. In Israel, you have an election coming up on March 2nd, and then I believe after the elections things will become more clear, and then we'll see if there's a possibility to move the peace process forward. The Palestinians have rejected the initiative because they feel it falls short of what their requirements are. So it's really their decision, not ours. We cannot negotiate for them, but our position is to be supportive of them. The second issue with regards to energy, Saudi Arabia is one of the largest investors in the world in technology. Whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's robotics, whether it's big data, whether it's electric cars, whether it's batteries for electric cars, we want to be in that space. We are also one of the biggest investors in renewable energy, solar, wind, water. We want to be able to be in the forefront of those areas. We know that eventually there may come a time where the world will move away from oil. I personally don't believe that the production of oil will drop. It's just that the energy pie will become bigger and oil's share may be smaller. Just like when the world shifted from coal to oil as the primary source of energy in 1960, the percentage of coal today is smaller than it was in 1960, but the production of coal did not decrease significantly. There are also other uses for oil, whether it's plastics, pharmaceuticals, other things. We want to be able to take advantage of this. But no, we see ourselves as a provider of energy, not just an oil producer. We provide energy. So we want to be able to provide solar, we want to be able to provide wind, we want to be able to provide other types of energy in order to be ahead of the curve as these changes happen in the world. With regards to Qatar, the situation is as it is. The Qataris know what they need to do. Our policy of zero tolerance means you cannot have terror financiers who are on UN lists operating freely in your capital, raising money and giving it to terrorist groups. That's not acceptable. Our policy is you don't give ransom to terrorist groups like Al-Hashd al-Sha'bi, $500 million in order to get hostages back. You don't do this. You're funding people who will come back and kill you. Our policy is you don't allow your senior scholars to go on television and condone suicide bombings. That's not acceptable. Our policy is you don't interfere in our domestic affairs and try to recruit people to work against us or against Bahrain or against the Emirates or against Egypt. That's our policy. So all we're saying to the Qataris is, look, you're our neighbors. We are relatives. The Qataris and the Saudis are the same family. We're like one family, along with Bahrain and the Emirates. So why do you do this? Why do you engage in this behavior? Why do you support the Muslim Brotherhood, a terrorist organization that's committed to overthrowing every country in the Islamic world? Why? You have a lot of money. You live in a secure neighborhood, fairly secure. Enjoy your wealth. Find a cure for cancer. That's what we want the Qataris to do. So we don't want Qatar to suffer, but we reached a point where we said, enough is enough. We're not going to tolerate this. If you change your behavior, we'll deal with you. With regards to the Israelis, we have no formal relations with Israel. Our policy has been once you have a peace agreement, then Israel will have normal relations with all Arab countries and all Muslim countries. That's what's in the Arab Peace Initiative. With regards to Turkey, we take issue with Turkish involvement in Syria and with Turkish involvement in Libya. We believe it's negative, not positive.
Hello, I'm right here. Carmen Gabriela from Radio Romania.
It's okay? We are gentlemen, right?
My friend Alina just allowed me to ask my questions, two of them. Since you mentioned Libya, how do you see this constructive role of Saudi Arabia in Libya, since there are elements in your country that support Field Marshal Haftar on one side, and would you change your position if the government in Tripoli who's relying on a Muslim Brotherhood offshoot in Libya would give up its reliance on this party? And my second question is, how does Saudi Arabia feel about potentially increasing role of NATO in the Middle East and Iraq, especially in the Middle East, an increasing role of NATO in the Middle East, and especially starting with Iraq, and how does that affect your future plans for the so-called Arab NATO? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, with regards to Libya, our position in Libya is that people should respect the UN arms embargo. We should move towards a ceasefire and then negotiations and then hopefully peace. We believe that the international community should be supportive of the efforts of the UN Special Envoy Ghassan Salama, because if we have too many initiatives, it gets confusing. Our view is that Libya is a country with a small population and a very large wealth. They have roughly $70 billion in the banks that are frozen, and they can produce up to 2 million barrels of oil. They have the longest shoreline along the Mediterranean. There's no reason why, within a very short period of time, Libya cannot be an incredibly prosperous country. So we need to get this thing moved. We're concerned about the flow of fighters from Syria into Libya. Our concern is that if Daesh or ISIS is able to get into Central Africa, it will be very, very difficult to dislodge them. And then you will have the consequence of that also, a trafficking of people from Africa into Europe and other places. So we are committed to a political solution in Libya. We have made that clear to both Haftar and Sarraj. We don't take sides in the Libyan conflict. The perception that Saudi Arabia is supporting one side over another is not really borne by the facts. We are concerned about the status of the radical militias in Tripoli and their impact on a negative impact on trying to arrive at a political solution. But we continue to consult with our friends in Europe and with the United Nations on how we can move this process forward so that we can extract Libya from the problem that it is facing. Was there a third part of your question? Oh, NATO, yes. Well, NATO is playing a role in the Middle East, whether it's formally as NATO or as NATO countries. The coalition to fight ISIS in Syria was started, when it started, Saudi Arabia was one of the founding members. It now includes more than 70 countries, and virtually all of the NATO countries are participating in it, so there is a role there. The same with regards to the fight against ISIS in Iraq. Our view is that when we look at the Gulf region right now, we have forces from a number of countries. After the Iranian attack against Saudi Arabia's oil facilities in Abqaiq and Khurais, a number of countries, the US, France, Britain, a number of countries sent forces to the Gulf region. Others provided us with support in terms of equipment that we can use to deter potential missile attacks. Most of those countries are members of NATO, so whether it's a formal or informal role, our relationship with the NATO members is very strong because they are our traditional allies. The UK, France, Italy, Spain, Greece. And so we have strong ties, and institutionally we have a dialogue with NATO, but not in terms of what we do about the Middle East and do we have an Arab NATO or not. We have the GCC countries together that have a force that's called Peace Shield that includes all of the GCC countries. We do common purchases to make sure our standards are aligned. We do exercises. And we have a headquarters of this force that can coordinate between the countries, but that's about it. And we're also working with the US to see what we can do to strengthen this force and broaden it and deepen it.
We had here. Yeah. Sorry. We should respect the initial order, right? Now, I mean, the initial order was how quick you raised the hand, right? Okay, so we had here a request from the very beginning. And after that, it's a lady waiting for us. Yep, we'll get the microphone.
Thank you so much. First of all, Your Excellency, congratulations for your... First of all, Your Excellency, thank you so much for your excellent, impressive presentation you made here. I'm representing a private foundation here in Romania, and I'm interested to know more about the relations between your country and China, the projects of Belt and Road, and role of China in the region, in the perspective of G20. Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Thank you. China is our largest trading partner. We have extensive ties with the Chinese. We have huge investments in China, and China has huge investments in Saudi Arabia. And that's a relationship that keeps growing and broadening and deepening. We don't see China as a threat. We see China as opportunity. We see China plays a large role in Africa with regards to investments and with regards to developmental assistance. In the region, China's focus is primarily on trade. And so we agree with the Chinese on the importance, as we do with Romania, on the importance of preserving the sovereignty of nations. We agree with the Chinese on the principle of adhering to the rules-based international order that I mentioned that has been in place since the 1600s. And we agree with the Chinese on the importance of non-interference in the affairs of other countries. So philosophically, we're aligned, just like we are with your great country. And so in that sense, we are concerned about the erosion of the sovereignty of nations, and we want to ensure that that erosion doesn't continue, and that we have order in the international system. But on balance, I'd say China is, like I said, our largest trading partner. We are the largest supplier of energy to China. We have, like I mentioned, huge investments in China, and China has huge investments in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, thank you. Please.
Okay, thank you for taking my question. I am Alina Angel, B1 TV channel. You mentioned as part of the 2030 vision, you mentioned the empowerment of women. If you could please expand on this topic a bit. How exactly are you going to do that, apart from what you've already mentioned? And the second question regarding the war in Yemen, you mentioned the opening of a reconstruction office, but how exactly are you addressing the humanitarian crisis? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. With regards to the empowerment of women in Saudi Arabia, I mentioned the issue of driving, which is really a silly issue. The issue of being able to get a passport without anyone's permission and to travel without anyone's permission. The fact that our law says women have to be paid exactly the same as men for the same job. The fact that 39% of entrepreneurs in Saudi Arabia today are women. The fact that the public spaces are no longer segregated. The fact that you can go and attend concerts, and you can attend soccer matches, and you can attend the openness in our society. The fact that even in our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 5 years ago, as I mentioned, the incoming class of diplomats was only 10% women. Last year it was 50%. We have appointed women ambassadors, we have women ministers, we will continue to do that. The head of our stock market authority is a lady. 2 of the top 5 banks, I believe, have women CEOs, not because they're women, but because they're the most qualified person for the job. So that's what we do. 55% of college students in Saudi Arabia are women, and we will continue to provide opportunities for them. The other question had to do with Yemen, right? Yes, what we have done is we have provided $14 billion in humanitarian assistance to Yemen since the war began. We have distributed it either directly through the King Salman Center, or we have distributed it through United Nations organization, the World Food Programme, the World Health Organization, and others. We have looked at what Yemen's needs are in terms of reconstruction, and we are identifying projects so that immediately when the conflict comes to an end, we can move quickly towards reconstruction in Yemen. We have already begun building projects, micro-projects in the areas not under the Houthi control. And things like small clinics, rebuilding homes, drilling wells so people can have water, so they can plant, so they can have jobs, they can feed themselves. We are committed to working with Yemen to get Yemen back on its feet, but we need to find an end to this war. And this war has to end based on a political settlement that does not allow the Houthis to have veto power in Yemen, nor does it allow them to have an armed militia outside the government. That's not acceptable. And so I believe they know this. The United Nations is working on this, and we're supportive. Every agreement that was made in Yemen, we supported. The Stockholm Agreement would not have happened without Saudi involvement and without the direct involvement of the Crown Prince. The Riyadh Agreement would not have happened had we not pushed all sides to come to an agreement and without the direct involvement of the Crown Prince. Now, every agreement we support, sometimes the Houthis sign on and then they don't implement. But we will continue to work on towards a political settlement, because that's the only way that this conflict can be resolved.
We have a question from the State Advisor of the President, Ligia Deca.
Hello, my name is Ligia Deca. I'm the Presidential Advisor for Education and Research. And in line with your comments on, well, freedom of speech, I would like to ask first a question about fundamental values. We have had discussions in Europe about a European education area, and we have a European higher education area for about 20 years now. And the discussions in between European states in a larger format have been on rebuilding on our fundamental values, two of them being academic freedom and institutional autonomy. And I'm wondering, since you did mention drawing the line between hate speech and being able to express yourself freely, how do you see institutional autonomy and academic freedom in this complex world context? And my second question is linked to internationalization of higher education. Saudi Arabia is well known for the foreign branches of reputable universities in Saudi Arabia in order to educate and train the many young minds that you have. But there have been discussions about sustainability and being able to build national capacity. And we sometimes fight with that, being a country that transitioned 30 years back from communism to democracy. So I'm just wondering, how do you ensure national capacity in the education and research sector while also enabling foreign providers to be based in Saudi Arabia? Thank you.
Thank you. I think when it comes to higher education in Saudi Arabia, we have built a large number of universities. We try to connect those universities with other universities around the world so that we believe that in order for knowledge to be acquired more effectively, it cannot be isolated. We have, for example, one of our universities, KAUS, the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, is one of the top scientific universities in the world. And it has collaborations with probably 50 countries, 50 universities, the top scientific universities in the world. Its students and faculty come from more than 60 countries. So the Saudi student population is probably 30–40%. The rest from all over the world. And it's all based on excellence. That's what we want. And the objective of the university, the vision for the university was use science to improve life. So that's how it started. And we also believe that besides connecting with universities in Saudi Arabia, we need to send our students abroad. So over the last 15 years, I think the number is over 500,000 of our young men and women have gone outside Saudi Arabia to acquire their education, from Japan to the United States. And the idea here is not just education, but also culture, values. So when they come back, they have a global mentality, and then they think globally and they impact others to think globally. That's part of the objective of our scholarship program. We are one of the countries that spends probably, or among the countries that spent the highest percentage of our budget on education, because that's important to us. And we try to review the curriculums on a regular basis to make sure that they focus on things that are practical. I think when it comes to primary education, the focus is now moving towards STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, so that our young people can then go to college and can get degrees that allow them to succeed in the workplace. Very committed to this. We have set up endowment programs for universities so that they can hire people, and the people they hire will not be subject to civil service salaries. So they can hire great scientists and great engineers and great philosophers and compensate them in a way that makes it attractive for them to work in Saudi Arabia. I'm not an education person. We do foreign policy. But this is what I can tell you. We have a huge commitment to education. People forget that in 1960 we had 0 schools for girls. Today 55% of college students are women. And that's incredible. When my father went to school, 95% of his contemporaries didn't have education. When I went to school, 100% education in one generation. I don't think many other countries were able to do this. That's the commitment that we have to education, because we believe that education is the most important element for success in life. If you provide people with education, everything else is possible.
Thank you. As you can see, a lot of things are very well received. But since Ligia stole my question, I'm going to push a little bit further, and after that the gentleman will come with his question. It's very important what you have said about education, and on a long term, that's the key element in the development of the country. But now, at the beginning of your speech, you made I would say, important distinction between the freedom of speech and the speech of hate. So there is a thin line between them. And here, especially in Romania, that there is, well, there are many sensitive topics, but this is one of them, because we faced for 50 years the censorship of the Communist Party. So who is going to decide about this thin line, what is good to be said and what is not? And I think this is in alignment with Ligia, because a good education goes hand in hand with the freedom of speech and generally with autonomy and freedom. Thank you.
I think that's a question that every society has to deal with. It's not science. We can't say 1 + 1 is 2. It really is about balance. It's about feel. It's about experience. And so I can't tell you that we know where the line is. Nobody knows. You've got, it's trial and error. It's experimentation. How do you deal with somebody who tweets? Is he or she a journalist? Or is it gossip? Is it fake news? Do you apply the rules of journalism to it? Or do you apply the rules of comedy to it? I don't know. I don't think anyone knows. But these are the questions that we have to grapple with. So as you try to find this line, you will make mistakes. You might overreach, and then you dial it back, or you might underreach and realize you need to go further. But that's something that comes with experience and with trial and error. Anyone who says, here's the line, I can tell you right now doesn't know what they're talking about. Because the line, you have to see, give and take. In Europe, for example, 200 years, French democracy, and they still don't know the line. I'm not being critical, I'm just trying to be realistic, that it comes with experience. I will give you an example of a US Supreme Court decision. One of the Supreme Court judges was asked about, excuse my topic, about pornography. What constitutes pornography? His decision was, I know it when I see it. Because he couldn't say, here's what pornography means. He says, I know it when I see it. The line. We don't know where the line is. We have a sense when somebody says you should go and kill somebody, that's clearly crossed the line. When somebody says something indirectly, how subtle do they have to be before they cross the line? I don't know. I think society as a whole has a certain sense of where the line should be, but that comes with time, with trial and error, with experience. Nobody can say, here's the line. But we need to think about roughly what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Calling for war is not acceptable. Calling for suicide bombings is not acceptable. calling for death against people who are not of your faith is not acceptable. That's the simple part. But where is the intolerance part that could lead somebody to call for this? That's the complicated part. And that's why we rely on academia to tell us and to help us with this issue.
Thank you for sharing with us your philosophy. So, the gentleman.
Thank you. I'm Ionuț Ordăchescu from Agence France Presse. I have two very short questions. First of all, can you please comment on recent reports saying that talks between Qatar and Saudi Arabia broke down soon after starting, and if you could please walk us through why that happened. And second of all, the Trump administration is pondering... can you hear me better now?
Now I can hear
You heard the first question?
The first one about Qatar.
Okay. So the Trump administration is pondering whether to halt the humanitarian assistance to Yemen. What's your view on that, and what will you do if the United States proceeds in doing so? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, with regards to Qatar, I'm not going to comment on the press report.
Okay.
But we have, like I mentioned earlier, the Qataris know what is expected of them. The Qataris know that we have made it clear to them that we want them to be back in the GCC, but they have to change their behavior. And we haven't seen a change in behavior by the Qataris. There have been, I will leave the story to the Wall Street Journal, so I won't comment on it, but we haven't seen a change in Qatar's behavior that would open the door for reconciliation. With regards to humanitarian assistance to Yemen, I haven't heard that the US is stopping its assistance. There have been the United Nations organization was going to stop the distribution of humanitarian assistance in Yemen because the Houthis were stealing it and selling it to fund their war machine, and they were not allowing access to these organizations to distribute the food in the areas under their control. And so they threatened to pull out. We are committed to providing Yemen with all the support that we can. We are committed to supporting UN organizations who operate in Yemen. We are committed to working through the King Salman Center in order to provide medicine and food and other humanitarian assistance to the people of Yemen. And we have been doing this since not only the war, but since 1970. And we will continue to do that. So we are committed to alleviating the suffering of the Yemeni people, and we are, as I mentioned earlier, we are committed after the end of this conflict to a comprehensive reconstruction program for Yemen.
Okay. Question here.
Good afternoon, Your Excellency. Thank you very much for your outstanding speech. My name is Flavius Caba Maria. I'm the head of Romanian think tank related to the Middle East issue. My question is, the first question is about the competition of great powers in the Middle East, especially related to Saudi Arabia. What is your successful story to balance between policy of USA in terms of security with Saudi Arabia, because one of the main pillar of US policy in Middle East is Saudi Arabia. In terms of economic, you are balancing with China. You have this relation with China. And also in the same time, in security issue, you are dealing with Russia. European Union have different opinion on the relation between Russia and European Union, China, European Union, and on this framework. And the second question is about Syria. How do you see your perspective related to the Syria issue? You mentioned something. Are you going to normalize your relation with Syria as other Arab countries already started? For example, Emirates? Are you going, if Bashar al-Assad will be re-elected next year, could be, or after this political transition, are you going to work with Bashar al-Assad government? And also related to Syria, if you are going to support Syria to be re-engaged in Arab League? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We see, as I mentioned earlier, we see ourselves as a member of the international community. We have a huge stake in the world financial system. We have a huge stake in the world energy system. We have the key role in the Islamic world, which is 1.6 billion people. That goes from Malaysia to Morocco. We have a strategic position in the between three continents, and we have three of the most important waterways right next to us. So we believe in stability in the international system. We believe in free trade. We believe in taking care of your people and your country. We don't believe in adventurism. And we believe that it is important to deal with everyone. America is our strategic ally. China is our biggest trading partner. Having strong trade ties with China does not come at the expense of America, and having strong strategic ties with America does not come at the expense of trade with China. Russia is a big player, and we are developing our relationship with Russia. We believe that engagement ultimately is the best way forward. We have common interests with Russia, and so we work on them. So we don't see that having good ties with everyone is detrimental to ties with anyone in particular. And in fact, if we have good relations with one country and another country that we have good relations with doesn't have good relations with that country, we can be helpful in trying to bridge the gaps between them. That's how we see our role in the international system. With regard to Syria, we believe that the Syrian conflict needs to be resolved on the basis of a political settlement based on 2254. We have worked on supporting the UN envoy to set up the Constitutional Council that has now been selected and that will work on drafting a constitution for Syria, and then you have referendum, and then you have elections, and the Syrian people decide who their leader should be. So we support that effort. We support efforts to arrive at a ceasefire. We believe that there should be a ceasefire, that the internally displaced people should be allowed to go home, that there should be an amnesty, that there should be beginning of humanitarian assistance and reconstruction in Syria. My country has provided humanitarian assistance to Syrian refugees outside Syria, as well as to the internally displaced people inside Syria. When the conflict began, we issued more than 2 million visas for Syrians to come to Saudi Arabia, and His Majesty ordered that they all be provided with legal papers so they can work, they can send their children to school, they can have access to medical care, and not one Syrian lives in a tent in Saudi Arabia. Not one Syrian lives in a refugee camp. They are part of our society. Now, most of them have left and gone elsewhere, but our approach is you don't put people in a refugee camp, because that only breeds more extremism, and it breeds more displacement, and it causes problems long term. So we don't believe in that. When the war in Yemen began, we had almost 1 million Yemenis come across the border. The same thing. They were made legal. Not one of them lives in a refugee camp. They have jobs. And when the conflict settles in Yemen, they can go back without having suffered the scars of living in a refugee camp for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That's our approach. Now with Syria, in terms of normalization, we believe that any normalization has to be part of a political process. We believe that the Syrian government has to take steps, in ceasefire, internally displaced people, amnesty, release of prisoners, especially women and children, moving along the political track before you can think about bringing them back in the Arab League. This issue was discussed in the Arab League last year, before the Arab Summit in Tunisia. The decision of the Arab world was, no, it has to be part of a political process. And then we have the conflict ending. Otherwise, what incentive is there to move towards a political settlement? Thank you.
Thank you. According to my order, we have a question here, one here, and another one here. So let's start. Yep. With the gentleman.
Thank you. My name is Doro Costa. I'm a former diplomat, and I'm now working with the New Strategy Center. Your Excellency, it was a very inspiring lecture that you delivered. There are lots and lots of comments and questions, and that is all due to your perspective. I would focus on two issues only. You mentioned at one moment that the kingdom promotes a non-ideological policy. Would you care to elaborate a bit on what you have in mind when you said non-ideological policy? And the second question is obviously linked to the relationship and the place of Iran. You have just mentioned now, a couple of minutes ago, that if there is a country that you have a good relationship with and another country has not a good relationship with, you can help. Do you see any country that might help in your relationship with Iran?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think when I meant non-ideological is we don't have any ambitions beyond our borders. We don't need land, we don't need people, we don't need resources. We have enough. We're not on a mission to change the world. When you look at ideologically driven countries, you look at Iran, their objective is to restore the Persian Empire. Their objective is to make sure that they dominate the region. That's what drives their policy. That's why their people are hungry. We don't have that. Our objective is to build our country, take care of our people, educate them, give them opportunity, because we have 70% who are under the age of 30. They have hopes, dreams, ambitions. We want them to realize them. We want them to take us to a higher level. That's what I mean by non-ideological. Other countries, for example, believe we had ideologies in the Middle East of pan-Arabism. We're going to unify the Arab world. Why? We can work together as separate countries. But when you have that ideology, you want to break down boundaries, you want to expand. We don't have that. That's my point about we're practical, pragmatic. We believe in balance of power. We believe in proportion in our policy. And we're realistic. We don't want to change the world in our own image. So that's what I mean by this. With regards to Iran, the problem that we have with the Iranians is unless and until they accept the principle of sovereignty of nations, until they abandon the principle of exporting the revolution, which is enshrined in their constitution, and until they accept the principles of international law and non-interference in the affairs of other countries, it's impossible to deal with them. How can you deal with a country that believes it has the right to export its revolution to you? How? How can you deal with a country that doesn't believe that your citizens who are of the Shia sect belong to them, not to you? We don't look at Iran and say the Sunnis in Iran belong to Saudi Arabia. They're Iranian, just like our Shia or Saudi. How can you deal with somebody like this? So the problem Iran has is it has to decide if it's a revolution or a nation state. Right now, it's conducting itself as a revolution. And revolutions are emotionally driven. There's no logic. There's no balance. There's no proportion. There's no respect for the rules-based international order. A nation state is a rational actor. It acts, it makes commitments, it respects the rules of the international system. That's somebody you can deal with even if you have fundamental disagreements with them. But somebody who wants to restore an empire that was lost thousands of years ago, who believes they have the right to interfere in our affairs, who believes that the ethos of the state is to export its revolution, how can you deal with them? That's the challenge that I think the world has with Iran. Thank you.
So here we have a question, yeah.
Thank you. Excellency, Ahlan wa sahlan to Romania. I'm a former diplomat who started his career with a 6-year stint in Syria, ended this career with a 6-year stint as an ambassador to Egypt, an arc of time where always Saudi Arabia used to be in the center. Excellency, after I ended my career, I started writing a book about the Middle East with a simple title, The Middle East, Quo Vadis? The Middle East, where are you going? It's not easy to answer this question, but I would like now to have just a simple point of order. Excellency, you know that the Romanians do have strong roots in the Latin world, in the Roman world. And against this background, we know that the most famous orator used to be Cicero. After this event today, I would consider, and I hope that the audience will agree, you are the Cicero of the Arab world, of the Middle East. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you. Thank you very much, much appreciated. I think you give me more credit.
Okay, thank you. We'll have a question from here. Yeah.
Sabina Fati from Radio Free Europe. I would like to ask you about Your
Excellency, I congratulate for your visit in Romania. I congratulate for your visit in Romania, and more than this, I admire your clothes, because there are traditional clothes as mine. I would like to ask you about vision of Saudi Arabia about interfaith dialogue. My name is Valentin Ilie, and I'm a Center for Interfaith and Intercultural Dialogue of University of Bucharest. And I would like to ask you about this vision, because I've seen more than 10 years ago about the visit of His Majesty King Abdullah to Pope. But after that, I didn't see more initiative. Please tell us about this dimension of. Thank you very much.
We believe in interfaith between religions and culture dialogue. We believe that all religions are the same. We believe that the values enshrined in religions, whether it's Judaism, Christianity, or Islam, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, it's all about compassion, mercy, peace, love, fraternity. It's about taking care of the poor. It's about making the world a better place. These are universal values that all religions share. We believe that using religion to divide people is a crime. Not a crime from a legal perspective, but it's outrageous that we should use religion in order to bring people together based on these principles. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia launched an interfaith dialogue in 2007 that began with first Muslim denominations, and then after 6 months a conference in Madrid was held that included representatives of all the faiths and all the sub-faiths. And then there was a high-level dialogue held at the United Nations in October 2008 to make sure that this is a global issue that we should all subscribe to. We established the Center for Interfaith Dialogue in Vienna. It's still operating. They do a lot of meetings and a lot of conferences. The board of advisors is over 100 individuals from all religions. The center hosts, like I said, gatherings and seminars and discussions on this issue, and also works with other centers around the world in order to promote this issue. We have had a program in the US where we linked 40 mosques with 40 synagogues, and then it was expanded to include South America, Europe, Australia, and other areas. So the effort is ongoing. The problem is all the good works nobody pays attention to. They only pay attention to the bad things. In Madrid, at the speech before the conference, or at the conference, the late King Abdullah said in his speech, he said, God, with his infinite power, could have made us all worship him in exactly the same way. The fact that he chose for us to worship him in different ways should be cause for us to celebrate our differences, not use them to divide us. That's the approach that we take to this issue. And we think that if we can strengthen and maintain the values that every religion calls for, this world will be a better place. But unfortunately, people hijack religion in order to promote a political agenda, and people fall for it. ISIS claims to be Islamic. It's not. They're murderers and they're criminals. The KKK in America claims to be Christian. They're not. They're killers. You have other extremist groups among Hindus, among Jews, in every religion that claim to represent their religion when in fact they're perverting the religion and they're acting in a criminal way. So we are committed to interfaith dialogue. We have had a number of visits by religious personalities, whether it was the cardinal from Lebanon, the Maronite cardinal, whether it was the cardinal from the Vatican who was in charge of foreign policy, whether it's Jewish scholars, whether it's Shia scholars, and we're trying to promote this, and we're doing it in a public way because we want our people and the world to know that we share the same planet, we live in one village. As I mentioned earlier, a forest and fire in Brazil can have an impact on Bucharest, and Corona in China can have an impact on Riyadh. We can't escape each other, so we better learn to live with each other. And if we have these common principles that we got from our religions, why not live by them? And work towards peace rather than conflict. So we are definitely committed in this area, and we will continue to work in this area. And I think I would recommend, if you have a chance to go to Vienna, visit the center and see all the work that they're doing. It's fairly extensive, but like I said, a good story is not retold. A bad story gets the front page. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sabina Fati from Radio Free Europe. I have two questions. How do you see the strategy of neo-Ottomanism and doctrine of neo-Ottomanism that used Turkey and the last time?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. How do I see? Can you repeat?
Strategy of neo-Ottomanism.
Ah, okay.
Okay, and the last one, when do you expect to find out who are the people who ordered the Khashoggi death?
Yes, okay. I think the idea of restoring empires is not something that has worked in history. So I would expect that any attempt to have an empire revived, I can't see any example in history where this has worked. So that's on this issue. With regards to the Khashoggi murder, we have had more than 30 people investigated. We have put on trial, I believe, 11. The court issued its verdict. 5, I believe, are facing the death penalty. And another 3 or 4 are facing jail terms. And I think 1 or 2 were acquitted. The case, I believe, is now going to the appellate court so that they can review the decision of this first court. The Khashoggi murder was a mistake. It was a terrible tragedy, and it was something that shook our country. It was not authorized. It shouldn't have happened. And what we have done is what every country does. We have investigated, we're holding people accountable, and we're putting in place procedures to prevent it from happening again. We have never had a situation in our history where where somebody was killed by agents of the state. We don't do this. And so I tell people, in the United States you had a situation in Iraq with Abu Ghraib, where American soldiers committed horrific crimes against Iraqis in an American prison. Did the commander know about it? No. Did the president authorize it? No. What did the US do? It investigated, it held people accountable, it put in place procedures to stop it from happening again. That's what governments do. Another example is the 1980s. Oliver North started dealing with the Iranians on Iran-Contra, thinking that Ronald Reagan wanted this. And Reagan did not want it. What did the US do? Investigate, hold accountable, and put in place procedures to stop it from happening again. That's what we're doing here. And so the trial, the legal process will play out, those responsible will be punished, and then hopefully we can move on. But it'll be many, many years before we overcome this, the pain of this tragedy.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, wait for the microphone.
I have two short questions. The first one is how can you deal with growing Islamophobia in Western countries? And at the same time, don't you think that United States, for example, are trying to make Iran the major danger in the area so that all the region will focus on Iran and forget Israel?
Okay, I think that the issue of Islamophobia in Europe will be dealt with by the European societies themselves. I think that in Europe you have liberal democracies that believe in equal rights, that don't believe in discrimination against minorities, and what you're seeing is an aberration. This is not what European societies are about. It's about rule of law, it's about equality of citizens, and it's about freedom of religion. So I think what you see from time to time is you see aberrations that have nothing to do with the reality, and you have to make and there's a self-correcting mechanism. At a certain point, Jews were being discriminated against in Europe. That's no longer the case. At a certain point, Muslims are facing discrimination. That will no longer be the case, because these societies are based on values that don't allow this to happen. And when some of it happens, there's a self-correcting mechanism in it. That's my belief of how I see the European countries. With regards to Iran, it's not America that's making Iran to look bad. It's the Iranians who are making Iran look bad. America did not blow up embassies and kill diplomats and blow up and try to assassinate people in Europe and blow up a synagogue in Argentina and blow up a housing complex in Saudi Arabia. It's Iran. America is not the one that's providing weapons and explosives to terrorists in Bahrain or the Eastern Province or Kuwait. It's Iran. Americans are not providing ballistic missiles to terrorist groups like Hezbollah and the Houthis. It's Iran. So the Iranians are the ones who put themselves in this position. And I believe that unless the world takes a firm stand rejecting these Iranian policies, Iran will continue to be a danger to stability and peace in our region. And so I believe that trying to create a parallel system to SWIFT so Iran can bypass the international payments mechanism is appeasement. I believe that trying to provide Iran with loans to compensate for the lack of income from the sale of oil is appeasement. And appeasement does not work. It hasn't worked when Hitler entered the Rhineland, it hasn't worked when he annexed the Sudetenland, and it will not work with Iran. The world has to take a firm position telling Iran that your policies are not acceptable. We don't care about what kind of government the Iranians want. It's their business. But we do care about what kind of policies they pursue, especially when those policies are aggressive towards us and destabilizing to the region. So I don't believe the Americans are trying to make Iran look bad in order to cover up for Israel. I think Iran is the one that's making itself look bad.
Good. Other question? We still have a few minutes. If not, with your permission, I'm going.
Thank you. I do have one more question, if we have the time and nobody else wants to ask anything else.
Okay.
Thank you. We were wondering back here in the press corner, which are the hot points in the Middle East where Saudi Arabia clashes, Saudi Arabia's interests clash with those of Turkey? Thank you.
We disagree on their incursion in Syria, and we've made that public. We disagree on their involvement in Libya and support for the radical militias in Libya, and we've made that public. We disagree with what they're doing in Somalia in terms of supporting radical elements. And our approach is we disagree with the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood, because that's ideology, and the objective is to try to take over the Islamic world, so we disagree with that. We don't believe that their conflict or tensions between them and Egypt are helpful. We believe that President Sisi came to power because of the will of the Egyptian people. We believe that, and then he was elected and re-elected, and we think that Turkey is a big country that should play a positive role in the region. And so that's how we see. But in terms of clash, we hope that we never clash with anyone. I mean, we have had problems with the Iranians when they launch missiles at you. I mean, that's a clash. But we haven't fired a bullet at Iran. We haven't fired a missile at Iran. We haven't provided Iranian opposition groups with weapons. We don't do this. That's not how we operate. We have the war in Yemen, which was not a war of choice, but necessity. We didn't want this war. It started 9 months before we intervened, and we intervened to stop a radical militia allied with Iran and Hezbollah from taking over a strategically important country. So that's kind of, we helped Sudan to set up its transition council, and we're supporting Sudan economically and politically until they come to a safe harbor. So our objective is to avoid clashes with anyone, and our objective is to try to promote stability. And when we see behavior that we think is not supportive of this objective, we point it out. So that's our approach to the region.
Last question. I'm just curious. For instance, I heard from you that Saudi Arabia has a great plan, namely to send young people abroad to study and come back and enrich the culture and the whole society with new ideas and perspective and mentalities, so on and so forth. Well, Romania used to have a similar plan. Unfortunately, I don't have the feeling that we use the full potential the young people we send abroad. In your case, when they are coming back, these young people, do you fully absorb them in an administrative apparatus? Do you think that you fully benefit of this wonderful experience and initiative?
Yeah, we have, actually I should point out, we send students abroad, and then they come, and we also offer scholarships to students from abroad to study in Saudi Arabia. Because if you have foreign students at your university, it enriches the student body, so that we have people from outside Saudi Arabia studying at Saudi universities on scholarships. Nobody pays anything. When the students come back, the objective is for them to be better equipped to get positions, whether it's in government, whether it's in the private sector, whether it's in their family business. It's really up to them. We have institutions that send their employees on scholarship, but then when this student comes back, they work in that institution. But in general, the vast majority of students are free to work wherever they want, because an educated Saudi young woman who speaks 2 languages, who's been around the world, is going to be a positive influence regardless of where she works. And if we tell them, you have to come and work here, that's constraining them. So our objective is prepare them and let them go out. Capitalism, free enterprise. And so when you look at Saudi Arabia, we have English is now our second language. We're beginning to teach Chinese in our schools. We already teach French and German at the universities. Because we want, and Russian, because we want to be part of this global village. And we want to be able to go from neighborhood to neighborhood and speak the language, understand the culture, enjoy the food, talk to people in a way that's familiar, and you can only do this by education. We also have students here in Romania, a small number.
But I wonder if we send you some students, some Romanian students to your country. For instance, we at the University of Bucharest, we have a unique department for Arabic studies. We're unique in the country. But overall, we will be very happy to strengthen and boost the collaboration between our countries in terms of, well, not just culture and education and innovation and research, but overall. Okay, I mean, it's time to thank to Mr. Ministry of State Al-Jubeir for this wonderful event. I mean, I value a lot of your passion. I hope you value our freedom of speech. And you gave us a lot of food of thought. So we'll think over, and maybe we'll meet again and ask you new questions. And we wish you all the best in all your endeavors. And thank you very much for visiting the University of Bucharest, Central Library and Bucharest, and Romania. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.